Hey, Allie.
Hi, good
How you
morning.
doing? Hey, did you
Oh,
hear we got a new pope? Well, obviously you
I hear
heard.
that.
He's
Yes,
he's the pope's he's an American, first time ever. Did you
interesting.
From Chicago?
From Chicago.
Yeah,
Huh.
I always thought the new pope would be from New York. Like the Pope of Greenwich Village. You
I
guys know the Pope of Greenwich Village?
don't know about it. No,
Really? It's one
no.
of the greatest
Tell us.
movies ever. Mickey Rourke and Eric Roberts, when Mickey Rourke's thumb gets, say, Charlie, they took my thumb. You know, nothing, huh? Let's just get started. Come on, Zay. Hey, Allie.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
I've been
Good as
spending
one can be.
I'm spending a lot of time with you lately.
I know,
Yeah,
totally.
we just came back from a great trip down to Charlottesville, to the University of Virginia, the Darden School, with cohort 13. But
That was incredible.
I'm thrilled to have you
Mm,
on the podcast.
Thank you.
So thanks for joining.
Totally. Anytime.
Um, I was, you know what? I was looking at your intake,
Mm,
and I was just so impressed with your bio. I'm just going to read it because I loved it. Allie, who's a dear friend of mine, is a coach and a facilitator, interested in the worlds within us and how they impact the world around us.
mm,
And you're going to learn a lot about what that means when we have this conversation. She believes in the power of change, creative vision, guiding leaders to bring their ideas to life with alignment, integrity, and awareness. And she integrates a multidisciplinary approach that blends system and design thinking, emotional intelligence, conscious leadership, and somatics. I'm not even sure I know what somatics is, so you have to tell us what that is, as
yeah.
well as her own journey, which I do know a little bit about, of entrepreneurship and creative practice. So that's my friend Allie. We've known each other for a very long time.
Totally.
We met through like someone in cohort 1 or 2, wasn't it?
Yep, cohort one, I think.
Yeah.
Two of the companies, maybe Annie
Oh,
Hodges
Annie Hodges, right?
and Brian Weinberg, who was
Oh, that's
he's
right,
part of.
Brian Weinberg.
Yep,
Brian,
totally.
yeah, the infamous Brian Weinberg.
Yeah.
I like Brian. I don't wonder what Brian Weinberg's doing these
I
days.
think he's an impact investing type.
Is he?
I think so, but I'm
Uh,
not 100% sure.
well, Allie and I met as you know, so cohort 1, which is now 12 years ago,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and we have been now working together for a long time,
Mhm.
doing a lot of work in the Conscious Venture Lab. And Allie, I want you to talk a little bit about, well, first of all, talk a little bit about your background.
Mhm.
Sort of all everything I just read, all right? Tell us what somatics is, but
Yeah.
also talk about your entrepreneurial journey as well, because I think that's really interesting for people to hear.
Yeah, totally. I can start there if that's helpful because it's
Yeah.
kind of the genesis. I was at the University of Maryland for undergrad and in courses that were teaching about systems and design thinking. And we came up with this bike share system. And this was in 2007. So it was before it was cool, before it was everywhere, all over the
Yeah.
US. And then we ended up building a company around that and working on that as a company when I graduated from college. And it turns out that you can be too early for a market, which I learned a fast lesson on. But we still got to test. We got a few clients. We really did build systems and get bike sharing out into these college campuses. But we just could not figure out how to make the business profitable.
Yeah.
And I've learned a lot about that since then. But when we folded the company, I kind of realized that I needed to do some personal digging to figure out what was next and what I could do to kind of harvest from this
Mm-hmm.
failure, you could say. And that led me towards the to just do some personal growth work and look at emotional intelligence and try to understand what was going on inside of me. And that started opening up a whole different pathway. I started realizing, gosh, there's particular values I hold in the world that could really inform my path. I loved bike sharing, but it wasn't really like the
Yeah.
thing that I need to get up in the morning and do. And yeah, there's just so much in understanding what's going on inside of us and how that is informing what we create in the world that I just got really interested in. And I started working for an organization called EO, the Entrepreneurs
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Organization. And what I was noticing there was that a lot of these founders who are, at mid to mid-sized companies, I guess, they've grown to over $1 million. All that they were talking about was the inner journey of entrepreneurship. They had gotten their business to a certain point, and what they were spending a lot of their time on was the emotional intelligence piece. And it really struck me that that was something that probably mattered from the start and from the
Yep.
beginning, and that that should be included when we're working with founders on the entrepreneurial journey. So that got me into emotional intelligence work and starting to understand that inner journey for leaders and building my own coaching practice. But I've always been so in love with the creative process that an entrepreneur goes through and what it takes to bring something to life. So
Yep.
a lot of what I'm interested in is how do we take all these tools that help us understand who we are and bring it into the creative journey so that we can be more effective and create things that are more in alignment with what we want. And part of why I love working with you, Jeff, and your vision and what you're building with CVL is that it's not just what do we create? It's what kind of world are we creating
Yeah.
and who are we becoming in that process? That matters so much. And so being able to align with founders who really want to create a different kind of world, that is something really near and dear to my heart.
It's I want to talk about sort of the work that we do together, right? So the Conscious Capitalism or the Stakeholder Boot Camp, and I want to talk about the genesis of that. But I want to really sort of dig into this idea that you're talking about mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
because it's even entrepreneurs who sort of want to be in our universe and want to think about not only what you do but how you do and what type of person, how do you show up as a person, as a leader. I think that sometimes in the midst of our sort of sessions, and Allie does 3 really impactful days for us, we'll talk about all of that, they get their, sometimes people are like, what are we about to do? So let's talk about how the Conscious Capitalism Boot Camp, the thing that we do, came about a
Mm-hmm.
little bit. So
Mm-hmm.
with your relationship with Cosmina, and so
Yeah,
I can sort of start that.
really.
We were thinking about expanding the Conscious Venture Lab, and then how to do it. And Allie had been doing some of the work that she just described, and we were thinking that obviously this was something that as an organization, myself and Cosmina Popa, who is going to be on the podcast as well, coming up, who was my original partner when we first started the Conscious Venture Lab, we were sort of really aligned with the way that Allie was thinking about the world. This idea of you had to sort of dig deep into your own mindfulness, your own consciousness, to really build the types of businesses that we want to have, see thrive in the world. So I sort of said to Allie and Cosmina, is there a way for us to think about the curriculum that we had built? And at the time, it was very early on, right? It was still evolving. There's a way for us to think about that, to build something, we were thinking Conscious Venture Lab in a box. Because people were coming to us and saying, hey, this is really interesting. How could we work with you? And I said, is there a way for us to think about that? And Allie and Cosmina said, well, let us go off and think that through a little bit. And then you pick it up from there.
Yeah, totally. We kind of did a brain dump. I got together with Cosmina and we did just like a brain dump of everything that existed in her mind and what you all were talking about, and really especially the stories of entrepreneurs who were practicing in this way. We really wanted to focus on storytelling, which I think is one of the beautiful things about what we've created, is that it includes a lot of stories, and just guideposts for how to think about these things and how people have practiced them differently. So we kind of made a big mess in a true creative process and then started to build of really, we started out with like the 4 hour experience of like a half day, tested it out with some entrepreneurs in London, which was where Cosmina was, got really good feedback from that. And then we started piloting it together, all of us. And over the years, we've built it out from that 4 hour experience into a day with a pitch. And then we expanded it to 2 days, just based on the feedback that we were getting from all the entrepreneurs, and really trying to make, I think our intention is to make all the concepts workable, like giving the founders time to grapple with what they mean to them and how they're going to apply within their own business, so that they walk away feeling like they have some understanding of, this is how I will practice my business different within these principles. And then giving them a chance to learn from each other, of course, because that's where so much of the learning comes from. But I was just thinking about how I think we've been doing it for 9 years at least.
Yeah.
Maybe since 2016. And it has just evolved and changed so much over that time.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you, the evolution is interesting. I want to talk about that. First, one of the amazing things that it just struck me when you sort of brought this up was how you guys sort of did that brained up, that sort of design thinking. Here's what and then let's just test it out, right? Which a lot of founders, they're always nervous about that. So I really appreciate both you and Cosmina. First of all, let's do it. What's the worst that can happen? And also, Cosmina's network at the time in London was really, really important, because you guys literally within a few days spun this thing up and said, hey, come and take this 4-hour session with us. And people raised their hands and said, yeah, we'll do that, right?
Yep, totally.
So her network remains pretty impressive. So I'll describe a little bit what we do today. So the boot camp, the Stakeholder or Conscious Capitalism Boot Camp, it started off, as Allie described, 4 hours, and then we've gone to a day with a pitch, and now to 2 days. And when we first started it, we were just doing it, and the idea is to sort of do a gate opener around the tenets of conscious or stakeholder capitalism. So we talk about culture, leadership, purpose, and managing for stakeholders. So we give the participants in this boot camp a sort of, it's a really intense beginning to learn about what those things mean. And again, we started with 1 day, and the idea of the 1 day with the pitch competition was, we were thinking about, okay, so when Allie came back and said, well, we didn't do the Conscious Venture Lab in a box, we did this other thing. And I said, okay, but that other thing is pretty cool, and maybe we could use it to go around to people who are asking us to bring this to different locations and see if there's any real interest. So that's how we started. We did it in, you guys did it in London, we did it in Cleveland, we did it in Chicago, we did it here in Baltimore, we did it in New York, we did it in Italy, which we'll talk about. But we got so much good feedback from it, we decided to put it into the Conscious Venture Lab program and to kick off the program like that. So that's how we got from the sort of 4 hours to the 1 day with the pitch competition to this now, which is a 2 day, very intense. It goes from 9 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. We just had our dear friend Susan Salgado, who's been on the podcast. She came and did a session, and she had been in Chicago, and she had a day in Chicago and a half a day somewhere else, and she came here to Baltimore, and she did a day with us, and she's like, I'm going to be exhausted. And I just kept thinking about, at the end of the 2 day session when you and I finish, I'm just ready to pass out.
Totally.
Right? But so that's what we do. So that's what this thing is. But talk a little bit, Allie, pieces that you've injected into this, the pieces around mindfulness and emotional intelligence that you've injected in this. We actually do a couple of times over the 2 days. We do meditations.
Yeah.
And that's where people are like, wait a minute, I'm in a startup accelerator. And we're like, yeah, we get it. Just trust the process. And you give people grace to say, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. You want to keep your eyes open, that's fine. but we've had everybody do it. And then at the end, there's always great feedback. But talk about how you sort of, even when you and Cosmina first told me, I was like, I'm not really sure, but I'm going to go with you guys because I really trust you. But talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that, and also about, in times like we are living in right now, which are pretty unsettling, right?
Yeah.
Why is this so important?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I remember that in the beginning. We were like, we're putting two things together that don't often go together. But I think one of the things that we both felt pretty passionate about was really practicing the consciousness part of the
Mm-hmm.
conscious capitalism and giving entrepreneurs an experience or an invitation, perhaps in environments where they're not used to having that, to be able to have a practice or to go through an exercise that allows them to connect with a little bit more spaciousness in their thinking. Um, and I think maybe it's the surprise of it that actually also works really well too, to say, like, actually you have permission as a founder to take 10 minutes to really sit and breathe and
Yep.
connect with yourself and notice the difference. I think that's another reason why we really wanted to make it experiential, was so that the founders could really feel after those 10 minutes what's different now, or what do they notice, or what was hard, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's that. But what has also been fascinating is, I think, since when we started till now, the trajectory has actually been that a lot of founders now do have a mindfulness practice, or that mindfulness has become a little more integrated into
Yep.
folks' lives. And I think, like we do often with the boot camp, some of what we're trying to say is that you have permission, that this is okay and great. And we really want to permission that part of you, even if most business environments don't always, celebrate that necessarily. But
Yeah.
it feels really important. And, in terms of why why we need it so much now, and this, I guess, can bring in the somatic piece. So somatics is like a big umbrella term, but it really is focusing, it's our study of kind of the sensing organism of a human being. So
Mm-hmm.
especially the body and the nervous system and all the communication and systems that are going on internally within us that include but are not just the rational thinking. And so really being able to offer things that support the nervous system, I think that's a big piece of having a practice that allows you to settle and to take some space, because there's a lot of research that shows we cannot get our best thinking done if our nervous system is totally amped up, and it
Right.
is really hard right now to not be in
Yes.
that
Hard
state.
not to be amped up, right? Yeah.
Right, we're going to be, so we need the practices that help us return to ourselves. And even just taking 2 minutes sometimes, I think, has been shown you can reset the physiology of your body in just kind of 2 minutes of breathing, and get yourself to kind of come to a different state, access different thinking, remind yourself of your values, what you're here to create, and it can kind of just shift the flow of everything. And it inserts that pause. In the emotional intelligence training that I have been a part of, one of the things I think it's often quoted to Viktor Frankl, which is the space between stimulus and response is where
Mm-hmm.
true freedom lies. So if we just have practices that help us create a pause between all the stimulus coming in and my reaction on the other side, that's when we can make different choices. That's when we can get more creative. We don't have to be at the, you know, whims of what's happening outside in the world, and that's hard, right? It's also not easy.
It's it's really hard. It's really hard, but it's been so valuable. I mean, I didn't really have, when we first started this, I didn't really have a mindfulness practice, and now I meditate every day. I meditate every day, And I have noticed that whole idea of freedom and the space between stimulus and response, that sometimes I'm like, when you're in this go, go, go all the time, right? And I got to get there, I got to get this done. And then I'm thinking, I'm able now to take a step back and say, well, what if I don't get it done?
Yeah.
And what if I don't get there? Or what if I just continue to do the work that needs to happen, but don't have this angst in my body about it?
Totally.
Just keep going, but don't worry about it, right?
Yeah.
And I've only been able to access that because of the mindfulness and the things I'm learning, continue to learn from you and Cosmina and people like that. It's not only, I think it's been great for me, but I think that there's something about this whole mindset that makes us different, right?
Mm-hmm.
That makes the work that we do different. We get, at the end of this 2 days, we always get the same reaction,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is that, wow, that was great.
Yep.
I never would have taken, and these I'm paraphrasing, I never would have taken the time
Yep.
to step back
Mm-hmm.
and consider my values and consider how my values can impact my business and all of those things that we talk about. Right?
Totally. Yeah. A lot of times I think the founders are kind of like, what are we doing, as they come in. And then on the other side, it's like, oh
Yeah.
my God, thank God you created that space.
We created that space. And that's the thing that, so it's so interesting, because in the beginning, I was nervous about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was nervous. We were going to do things
Yep.
different, and I was nervous about it. And now the nerves are completely gone, because
Mm-hmm.
we've done this for 9 years, and we've got enough. It's probably anecdotal data, but it's almost every company that we've worked with over 9 years, at the end of those 2 days has said, yeah, thank God, because
Yep.
I never would have taken that time.
Yep.
And I never would have gotten to some of the insights, right?
Yep. Totally. And really being able to have that 10,000-foot view of where they're going. And it's that counterintuitive taking the step back to actually see farther and be able to take your next steps with a lot more clarity and effectiveness. I always think of the Stephen Covey time matrix, which you might be familiar with, of the important and urgent,
Yeah.
not important, not urgent. Most
Yeah.
entrepreneurs spend their time in the important, urgent category.
Right.
And we forget that the important but not urgent category is actually where leadership happens. And we have to get to that space somehow. Otherwise, we're firefighting everything. And some of the growth is like, how do I make space for what's really important, but is never going to be knocking on my door saying like, hey, you need to deal with this right now. Or it might in various ways, but it's hard to recognize, oh, wow, what I need is to take this step back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just it remains so amazing to me when I see that on the other side of this. The other really interesting thing about this is that this work has helped us do some amazing things, right?
Yeah.
I was approached 2017 by a group of folks who were doing a project. And when they first told me about it, I was like, that's probably bullshit. They said, we're going to run an accelerator at the Vatican, because Pope Francis, God rest him, rest in peace, was really sort of focused on how entrepreneurship could help with both climate change and how climate change impacted forced migration, two things that he really cared about. I wasn't when I met the gentleman, a guy named Ibrahim Al-Husseini and another guy named Eric Haar, who were running this, wasn't really sure, but they convinced me that it was going to be real, and I ended up taking a trip to Rome and going to a conference, and I said, okay, it looks like it's going to be real. However, they asked us to invest. It was in our first fund. And I said, no, I'm not sure that we're interested in investing. And they said, well, why not? This seems like it aligns with your thesis. but they were building a regular, sort of a Techstars, Y Combinator, when nothing wrong with those programs, but they were building an accelerator program based on that model. And, as we're talking about here, I said, well, yeah, we think that that's all important, but we think there's other things that are important as well, right? And this all the stuff that Allie and I are talking about, how you show up as a human being. And I said, look, the Catholic Church doesn't need any more headline risk. And if you're investing in companies and you're not sort of focused on how they show up as humans, not only might you have some of that headline risk, but it's not what we'd be interested in. We like the ideas, we like that, it would be interesting work, but that's not what we do. We do, what you do plus something else, which we think creates better businesses. And they said, well, how would you bring that into the program? I said, well, Allie and I could come over and help run it for you. And they said, yeah, let's do it. And that was really an amazing experience. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And that was actually, I think, the first time we built it out longer. Like, we extended it from 1 day to 2 days was with that program. And it was incredible. I mean, just the getting to work with entrepreneurs from literally all over the world, because there were founders from like every corner of the globe inside of that program. It was so fascinating, but also so important to add that component of how do you practice business? Because, like you say all the time, which I think is so important, you can have a social mission, but the way you carry it out could do it total injustice. People see this all the time or have experienced it, where you're like, man, you abuse the people who work for you, or you really don't follow through on what you say you're going to do, but you're doing good. So we just put it under the rug. And I think what we're trying to say is, like, that's not okay.
Not okay, right?
It really matters.
Allie is referring to this, when Rick Fraser and I were, and you guys have all heard me talk about Rick. When Rick and I were in the consulting world, he used to say, we would tell people, we worked for not-for-profits that were literally doing the Lord's work, that were miserable places to be. And we didn't want to be with them, and their employees weren't giving their best, and their suppliers weren't giving their all, and communities, even while they were doing great work, still had problems with them. And it was all about how they were showing up as human beings. So really interesting stuff. I wonder, Allie, why, you're obviously deeply ensconced in this work, particularly in the parts of emotional intelligence and mindfulness and care for yourself and working through your values. But you could do this with a lot of folks. So I wonder why you think we need visionaries and conscious entrepreneurs now. And why? What's drawn you to working with us at the Conscious Venture Lab?
Yeah, totally. Well, definitely some of it is my own journey. I know the power. I think there's something so deeply empowering about having an idea and bringing it like into the world. That is one of the most empowering experiences, and it's one of the most growth-filled experiences. If you want to grow as a person, that's a good avenue into it, because you're constantly having to learn how to grow. And I think in some ways doing that holds you accountable to what you want to create, because you won't succeed if you can't really stay accountable to that. But I think right now, especially when we're watching so much being destroyed and so much change, it can feel incredibly disempowering to feel like, God, how do we navigate this landscape? And those of us who feel like we can see other ways, better ways, a different kind of future we want to live in, need the support and the tools in the community to be able to do something, however large or small, right? Like, even if you don't end up creating a company, still to take an idea you have and be able to bring it into the world matters. And then especially if you can figure out how to build some structure around it and bring it in as a business, this is kind of the thesis that if you can create value for people in some way, you can sustain a really good idea that helps solve things that we're struggling with. And I think that it's often in these times, the people who might be able to see beyond the horizon line of like right now we're in a time where it's really challenging and painful and hard, and a lot is being destroyed. And I think that many founders or creatives see beyond this time into something else, and they're a part of what helps us get there, right? They're a part of like
Mm-hmm.
holding this vision even when we're in the midst of something very different, which actually can support so many people to kind of see something else too, and come along. And like we talk about, when you can get to a really compelling why vision for your company, you can rally people to join you,
Yeah.
right? And you can kind of give hope and inspiration for people to create a different kind of world, to be in the world differently together, to create these maybe like micro communities of where we are practicing business or life in different ways, so that even while we're amidst all this, there's something else that we can experience and do together with one another through our relationships, which I know is yet again another thing. I think this is probably one of the things I've learned over time is also what makes your work so differently. Like, you really value the relational aspect of
Mm-hmm.
business, right? And stakeholder theory, stakeholder capitalism. And at the end of the day, it's saying that these relationships that we have with one another really matter. And obviously, what we're seeing is that there's trying to be a destruction of relationships. So
Yeah.
the antidote is, how do we actually put relationships at the center
Yep.
and make that the core of what we're trying to build and how we're trying to operate with one another. And for people who can practice business from that perspective, it's very different. And it helps us start to create a different kind of world already now, today.
Yeah. Creating a different type of world. The other thing that's really interesting to me about what I've found since we've been doing this together, Allie, is that it's um, you might you might hear what we're saying as we talk about this emotional intelligence and relationships and mindfulness and all of that sort of stuff that feels like it's, sort of the soft stuff. And as
Yeah.
Rick would always say, it's not the soft stuff, it's the real stuff, right? Because the relationships are what drive value, right? And if you get in touch with this, you're going to be better at building relationships, and those are the things that drive value, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Culture and relationships. So that's, so one aspect of this. But the other thing, as people listen to this, they might think, well, it depends on the type of business you're in, and my type of business, or where you live, and that sort of thing. But we've seen this across industries, not only in the lab, but in some other things we've done. We'll talk about in a minute, across geographies, because not only did we do this with companies from around the world, in Italy, and then we were invited to come to Tec
Right.
de Monterrey in Mexico City, to help them run a conscious venture lab program in Mexico City based on a referral from Raj. But so that was all Mexican founders in Mexico City,
Mhm.
and that was fascinating as well to see how those founders sort of grappled with this and gravitated towards it.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. And one of the things I feel like we've been learning when we bring it into different cultures is that different cultures also relate with this. There's a pulse, right, where they're all relating, and then they relate with it in different ways.
Yeah,
And I think it's been really interesting for us to learn, oh, wow, okay, here, this is, or, people are working out family business, and that's like its own whole other component to it.
yeah,
Um, but being able to see it across culture and in different ways in Mexico, in Europe, in this more global context has been really fascinating to recognize. But there's also just a heartbeat of people want to be more human with each
yeah.
other.
People want to be more connected with each other, and so we've had the Mexico thing. We've had also, it's been interesting. We've had lots of founders from Africa come
Yeah.
through the Conscious Venture Lab and how they sort of respond to this. And it's interesting to me also that sometimes you find that underrepresented founders, they're craving more community,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
And they come through our program and they're like,
Totally.
we had someone, fly in from Africa for our last demo day
Yeah.
because they just continue to crave the community we've created.
Yep. Totally.
and then you get, and then, so we think about geography, and then, you think about the thing that we're just finishing now with the Department of Energy, an Advanced Research Project Agency from Energy, ARPA-E, where we work with 20 PhDs and postdocs who are doing zero carbon mining, right? And we expose them to this thinking, and we get the same reaction.
Totally. Yeah. It's so interesting how people I think we had a little pushback in the beginning, but if they stay with the process, then they get to it and are reckoning with it in a really interesting, beautiful way.
Yeah. So, Allie, what else are you working on right now? I know that we do a lot of work together, but it's usually a couple of weeks early on in our program. What else are you working on these days?
Yeah. Well, one thing I was gonna share is that I'm starting to get into retreats, talking about taking space and taking care of the nervous system. And I think especially in these moments where we could all use some support with being able to have the pause and the rest to get back into our creative selves. I'm going to be doing a retreat in New Mexico, which is one of my favorite places, as you might know, Jeff, in Taos, New Mexico. That's a really kind of on that reset to be in a regeneration with your vision. And I am starting to lead more workshops, especially from the somatic piece, and bringing somatics into entrepreneurship, into leadership, working on embodiment. So just kind of how do we really practice what it is we value and notice where the challenges come up. And that's where the kind of inner world piece, I think, is really important. It's so easy, of course, to know in our minds what we want to do, but to practice it on a daily basis and have the space to really get into the nuances of what happens if I'm falling off from what I want to practice and how do I get back into that space. So, starting to create some workshops for folks to get into that together. And I think one of the things I feel, and I was going to just bring this point back into that, having community, like you said, so much often with the work we're doing at the boot camp is oh, actually you have community. There's other people who want to do business in this way. And at some level, that's one of the most important things I hope people get from it, is that they're not alone in that process. And that's definitely something I am really passionate about, is creating space where people get to share the load together with each other. Building a different kind of world is kind of impossible all by ourselves. But if we get to have these spaces where we're with peers and people who can reflect, give us honest feedback, give us accurate feedback, help encourage and support and remind us and affirm you're making the right choice, even if the world at large might be showing you something different. These values do matter, and how do we stay on track with that? Creating peer spaces for that is really important. And I lead some groups. I do some group work around that as well as one-on-one coaching. True jack of all the things.
a lot going on in the universe, Allie. Well, send us any information. We'll put that in the show notes so people can access it and get in touch with you and see what you're going on. I love the way that you describe this. I've been known to say, when I first met Raj and started thinking about stakeholder and conscious capitalism, and met Ed, and met Kip Tyndall and John Mackey, I quote unquote found my tribe. And Rick Frazier has been sort of really pushing back against this notion of tribes, right? Because it's what sort of separates us. But I like the way that you describe this in terms of coming together in community, right?
Yeah.
Because anyone can be in my community, right? If you just want to live in the future and think about, how we can use business not only to create financial value, but to create societal value and individual value, and be more connected to ourselves. Businesses has the opportunity to do all those things, right?
Yeah.
So I think that we're trying to figure out how do we use this to bring us together, as opposed to how to use it as another wedge to separate us. So I love the way you describe that in terms of finding community.
Totally.
I'm
So
gonna
important in this time, and it's how we stay sane, I
Yeah,
think.
that's how we stay sane. I'm gonna use that, the finding community. Allie, so I know you got a lot on your plate, so we're gonna wrap up here in a minute. We have one final question that we ask everyone. It's going into a big list.
Okay.
All you listening, you know what I'm gonna get to. So you're on a desert island,
Okay.
and you have 5 songs or 5 albums. What are they? That's all. It's
Oh,
the only 5 pieces of music, or the 5 albums that you're going to have for the rest of your life, because you're stranded on a desert island. You don't know when you'll get off. What are those 5 pieces of music?
oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I am really mine might be a little bit different, but there is this really cool uh Mexican like fusion group that I listen to called Arena Tropical, and they're so good. So they'd be one. They'd be one of the
Arena
albums.
Tropical. Okay.
Yeah, I love Leon Bridges. He'd be on there.
All right.
Um, let's see. I think I would also add, hmm, maybe a little Bon Iver to just chill.
What is it?
Bon Iver. I can
You got to
Boniver.
put that in the chat so Zay can pull it up. All right.
Yeah, Justin Vernon. Um, and let me see what I've been listening to. I cycle so much. Well, right now, Chapel Roan is on my list.
Okay.
I love
That's
her.
good.
And I really also love the Buena Vista Social Club.
Oh, I love the Buena Vista Social Club.
Yeah.
All right, that's a good list. We'll,
Nice.
we gave you a little grace. We let you pick, musicians. Zay and I will pick some good songs for you out of
Okay.
those, because
Cool.
we're building the Spotify playlist,
Oh, I
conscious
can send you.
capitalism remix. Yeah,
Okay.
so yeah, you can send us some stuff too.
Okay.
Yeah. All right,
Cool.
Allie.
I love that.
So great to see you.
Likewise.
Are you in Maryland right now, or are you in New
I'm in
Mexico?
DC right now, but I'll be back in Maryland.
Oh, you are. And
Yeah.
when you're headed to New Mexico for your thing in August?
Yeah.
All right. Well, send us information on that.
Okay.
This has been, as always, lovely. I love talking to you. I love being with you. So thanks for joining us, everyone. This is Capitalism Remix. I'm Jeff Cherry. My wonderful, wonderful guest, my friend Allie Armitage, and
Thank you.
we'll see you soon, Allie. Okay.
Sounds great.
You
Take
guys
care.
take
Thanks.
care of each other out there.
Yeah.
Peace.